Hello guys and welcome to another monthly wrap up. I can't believe we're already on to our May monthly wrap up. This month has literally flown by. I read a total of 8 books this month. We had 7 books on the TBR this month and I got to 5 of those books, so 2 of those books went unread for now, but we read 8 in total. Let's get straight into it. The first book that I read in May was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This one is one that I'm really glad that I read. I basically have like a list of classics in my head that at some point I would just absolutely love to read, and this was very much on there. It was like the top of my list. This one joined with Wuthering Heights are like my top 2 at the minute. I did find the language in this one kind of hard to get used to, but I do think that around the halfway mark I was a lot more used to it and I kind of knew what was going on. The actual dialogue of this I found super easy to read, and I feel like I was quite surprised by that, but the dialogue actually flew by and was just very easy to understand. I feel like I wanted more from Elizabeth and Darcy. I just feel like I wanted more. We were told a lot of things had passed between them and that they'd spent a lot of time together, but we didn't actually get to see that many scenes with them spending time together, if that makes sense. I just wanted more from them to fully believe in them. The thing that really stood out to me in this is actually Jane and Elizabeth's relationship. Jane is her older sister, and their relationship, I really liked how they got on and how they were together and how they had some sort of understanding with each other. I also really liked Jane and Bingley's relationship. I thought those two had a lot of chemistry between them, and I don't know how we've quite got that when we don't really spend time with them too. I actually don't have a rating for this one. I don't know why I haven't started rating classics yet. I think it's because I haven't read enough to create a rating system, if that makes sense. So I actually didn't give this a rating, but I am really glad that I read it. The next book that I read was The Tenant by Freida McFadden, which is her newest release. And this one was definitely an amusing story. It was one of those where it was kind of a slow setup and you really just didn't know where it was gonna go. It's not so in terms of the writing, because I feel like Freida McFadden's writing is always, majority of the time, very fast paced and very bingeable. It's just in terms of the actual story, I felt like she was setting up a lot in order for us to have these plot twists or these things go wrong. But the things that were happening to the main character just made me giggle at times, because when he literally thinks it can't get worse, it does. I did find this one with the twist a bit kind of coincidental, and I think it was kind of underwhelming because of that. It was just one of those twists that you were like, okay, that's very convenient. But it was a very fast-paced read. I don't think it's the most memorable out of all the books that I've read by her, but I did enjoy it when I was reading it and I rated it 3 stars. I've also just realised I haven't told you anything about what this book is actually about. This one basically follows Blake, and Blake has just lost his job and he's struggling to pay for the house that he lives in with his fiancée. So they basically agree to rent out a room and get a tenant. This tenant moves in, and then some things in Blake's life start to go downhill very quickly, and he basically assumes that it is all the tenant's fault and it's the tenant's doing, and thinks that the tenant has this vendetta against him. That's basically the plot of this one. Then I moved on to Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I loved this. I loved this. This one follows the rise and fall of this rock band in the 70s, and this one's really interesting because it's all in interview form. It's all interview, and I just found that, first of all, that was so quick to read, and second of all, it was so interesting to read with how we were getting the information and how we could still imagine these scenes playing out and happening, but we were basically being told what was happening. I literally binge read this in like 2 sittings. I think they captured the whole 70s rock and roll vibe really well, and I think the dynamic between all of these characters is really interesting, and not only just between Daisy and Billy, our 2 main characters, but also between Billy and Camilla, between Billy and the rest of his bandmates. I just find the kind of human dynamic that they had going on very interesting. Yeah, I really enjoyed this and I rated it 4 stars. Then I moved on to Night Weaver by R.M. Gray. This was actually a predicted 5-star read for me. and I was kind of surprised when I picked this one up. We basically follow Asta, who is part of this pirate family, and we also have the Nightweavers, who have all these myths and rumours about what they're like and how dangerous they are, and Asta's family basically end up working for the Nightweavers. That's kind of a general summary of it. We have this sort of enemies to lovers, but I wouldn't really say they were necessarily enemies. They're just kind of two sides of humans versus Nightweavers type thing. But I wouldn't really say that they were necessarily enemies. The actual romance in here was very flat for me. I really wanted more from them two and their back and forth and their banter together. I actually didn't know who the love interest was meant to be. Every single time that potential love interest was introduced, I was like, is it you? Is it you? Is it you? But it actually ended up being the one that I was the least interested in. I also found the actual world building quite confusing, just in terms of there was so much information that was given to us up front, and I would have really loved to actually see it in action and to see the story rather than being told the story. There was just so much telling and not showing. I also found that the magic system they had going on was too confusing. I think it had too many elements to it when there just didn't need to be, because not only did we have this elemental magic, which within that you could be part of one of the elements, but then you can also do other things on top of that. So an example, if you were an earth wielder, you could also mend bones or like be some sort of healer. And then on top of that, completely separate to that magic system, we also have the whole sorcery system. And I just think overall kind of confusing. I also think, considering I went into this thinking that it was a pirate romantasy, we didn't really get to see much of the pirate vibes. Like, she very much came from a pirate family, and the actual pirate ship out at sea situation, we didn't get to see that in this first one. But I will say that if you are interested in a pirate romantasy, then I do get the impression that the second book is a lot more focused out at sea. And as for the actual story and the plot twist that we had in here, I actually kind of wanted to DNF this, but I kept reading it in the hopes that I would be absolutely amazed with the plot twist. All of the little twists that we had were things that I'd already predicted within like the first 100 pages, which kind of made me so sad. So I'm kind of gutted about this one, honestly, because I thought I was going to absolutely love it, but I ended up rating it 2.5 stars. Next, I read Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, which is her newest release. I really like this one. I've seen so many mixed opinions on this book, but I really liked it. It's kind of like Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo mixed with Beach Read by Emily Henry. We have Margaret, who back in her day was this big socialite, and she was always in the press. Her family was very well known, and she basically has a story to tell of these scandals and these secrets that were in her family. And then we have these two writers who are basically on this 1-month trial to interview Margaret and to get to know her in order to hopefully tell her biography at the end of the month trial. So we have these two writers who are kind of up against each other, so it's kind of like a work rivals situation, but who are also getting to know each other at the same time. And then we also get kind of a story within a story, because we get to know Margaret a bit more and we get to hear what was going on with her family and all the secrets and scandals and everything. I have been seeing so much that in this one the romance wasn't really romancing, but in comparison to her other books, I would say this was quite similar in terms of how much romance there was in it. I really enjoyed the setting of this small town. I also enjoyed Margaret's story. At first, I was kind of confused with the family tree, family history situation, because she starts off really far back in her family and we're introduced to quite a few characters and you're like, wait, who are you? Who are you again? But once I'd come to terms with who everybody was and I could kind of imagine the family tree, it did become a lot clearer. I also really liked the kind of messaging that was in her story, or just within the things that she was doing in present day. So things like the pathway that she had in her garden and how it only had one start and one end, and it's not really about the destination, it's about being on the path and appreciating how beautiful the path was. I just really liked that kind of theme that kept coming up. I also really liked the parallels between Margaret's life and her story and also Alice's life and her own story. And not only Alice, but also Hayden's whole backstory and everything. There were so many parallels between all three of the stories that were happening. I also absolutely loved how we could see how things were passed down generations and how we are very much made up of those that came before us. And I think that whole idea was really interestingly represented in here. Yeah, I just feel like this is one that I took a lot from reading it, and it's become my second favourite Emily Henry book after Happy Place and I rated it 4 stars. Then I did a reread of We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This is actually, I think, the first book that I've ever reread. And I wanted to reread it because the show is actually coming out in June, which I'm beyond excited about. I can't even tell you how excited I am. The casting for this, so good. So good. And I actually wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to reread it, just because there were some elements of it that I couldn't remember because I read it years ago, and I kind of wanted to be surprised by the show. But I am so glad that I reread this book. I'm so glad. The second time reading it was an entirely different experience because I know the end. And I was also kind of worried that it wouldn't be the 5-star, 6-star read that I thought it was years ago, but I was pleasantly surprised because it definitely still is. Just for slightly different reasons, I think, this time. Because rereading it, there were so many Easter eggs that were put in and so many things I wouldn't have noticed the first time that I read it that I read this time and I was like, oh my god, don't do that to me, don't do that to me. And the way that this was 10 times sadder than the first time that I read it. Which I really wasn't expecting because obviously I know what happens, so I was like, it's not going to catch me off guard. Boy was I wrong. Boy was I wrong. For anybody that doesn't know, this book is a YA psychological thriller. It's kind of hard for me to explain the actual plot of it without giving anything away, but it basically follows this really rich family who go to their own island every summer and they spend the summer there together. And I feel like that's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say. I just want to keep it brief because this is one that you're better off knowing the least about going into. But it's very much got kind of an eerie, what is going on kind of vibe. I honestly just found it so interesting reading it for a second time and I'm so glad that I did. And I would definitely recommend, if you haven't read this, to read it before the show comes out, and also if you have read it, to give it a little reread, because the way that I noticed so many things that I hadn't noticed before. And like I said, this is very much still a 5-star, potentially 6-star read. It's one of my favourite books of all time. Then I picked up Reckless by Elsie Silver, which is the 4th one in the Chestnut Springs series. I finally got to this book. I finally got to it. And Theo Silver, can we just take a minute? Can we just take a minute? That man, that man. Can you hear the rain? Oh my goodness. In this one we have Winter and Theo, and Winter has just come out of this toxic marriage, and from the other books she has this very kind of cold exterior. She's kind of villainized a little bit in Flawless, which focuses on her sister Summer. So this one is kind of like, we get to know Winter a lot more and we get to see her backstory and what she's actually like. And then we also have Theo, who is a bull rider. He is also from the first book where Rhett is training him, I believe. And in this one we have the accidental pregnancy trope, which I was kind of skeptical about, just because I feel like I haven't really read anything with that trope in, where it's like one of the main tropes, so I don't really have a strong opinion on it. But I've heard that it's one that so many people just really don't like, and I was pleasantly surprised with how it was done in here, especially with the kind of unexpected way that it was dealt with. That's all I'm gonna say. But going into it knowing that it had that trope in, I kind of expected it to be done a certain way and it wasn't, which I was really pleasantly surprised with. I think Winter as a character is very genuine and very relatable at times, and I think a lot of her kind of insecurities and the way that she kind of puts walls up very quickly, even though it's frustrating to read at times, especially in their kind of conflict, it makes her a really real and genuine character. I also love Theo. Theo Silver, he has become my favourite Chestnut Springs fan. He's become my favourite. First of all, there's just something about a bull rider that gets me every time and I don't know what it is, but I love it. And I also really liked how he was with Winter and how he really seemed to understand her unlike anybody else did. And he knew kind of what she needed and how to deal with her putting her walls back up and things like that. Like, he just seemed to understand her on a different level and I really enjoyed that. I did listen to most of this on audiobook and I really enjoyed it on audiobook actually. It was so fun to listen to and I genuinely think this is my favourite in the series so far, and I rated it 3.5, which might be kind of confusing if you've seen my ratings of any of the other books, but I think overall I've brought my Chestnut Springs ratings down a bit just with the more I read and the more my kind of reading taste changes. But I still really enjoyed it and like I said, it's my favourite. so far. And then I moved on to The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, which I can't believe I finally read this book. This one is set in France during World War II, and it's basically a story of these two sisters and how they deal with the war. It's a very powerful and moving story, focusing on women and what women do for the war and how they help other people. I found both the main characters' development throughout the story so interesting in here, because we have these two very different sisters who have a lot of history and backstory behind them. We have Vianne, who is very much a rule follower, very much wants to lay low and not get in trouble. And then we also have Isabel, who is rebellious and really wants to retaliate and wants to stand up for what she believes in. And at the start it's kind of frustrating to read because they're both very much opposite ends of the scale, to the point where for their own reason they're both putting themselves in danger. And I found it really interesting how they kind of changed over the story and how they became more true to themselves in terms of their beliefs and everything, but also they were doing it in a way that was helping other people and they were resisting in their own way. So we had these very different characters but ending up in a similar place in terms of what they were doing for the war. This is one of those where the plot, I had no idea where it was going to go. I had no idea. There were a couple of things that happened I was like, didn't see that coming. What on earth? Did not see that coming. And I think it captures this time really, really well, especially for women, and how uncertain everything was and how they had no idea what was going on or the kind of scale that everything was gonna go to. They must have felt so uncertain and confused at this time, but also on top of that being terrified as well. I just think that was done really well. I also felt very much transported to France. I literally felt like I was there at some points. I also think the whole theme of women in the war was focused on really, really well, and especially the fact that after the war, when it was all over, they never got any medals, they never got any recognition for what they'd done, because they're very much behind the scenes and people don't realise the actual impact that they had. This is also one that I annotated just because there are so many great lines in here and so many things that I just wanted to remember, and I really like the way Kristen Hanna told the story, and I would be intrigued to pick up one of her other books potentially at some point. But yeah, just a very moving story. I will say I didn't cry, which I feel like is kind of surprising. It just didn't get me. I don't know why. I think it maybe because the whole sort of vibe of this book is quite sad, and it wasn't necessarily unexpected for me, everything that happened. So I think maybe that's why it didn't get me. It was very powerful, very moving, and I rated it 4 stars. And there are all the books that I read in May. As for book of the month, if you're new here, I basically do book of the month every month where I give a little shout out to my favourite book that I read that month. And for May, kind of hard because we had 3 4-star reads and they're all quite equal in my head, so to choose between them was kind of hard. But I'm gonna go with Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I just love this. I just had a really, really great time reading it, and I feel like it's gonna be one of those that I still think about because I've literally thought about it since I put it down as well. So for May's book of the month, I'm gonna go with Daisy Jones and the Six, but it was very close between that and The Nightingale, and also Great Big Beautiful Life. Was very close. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this monthly wrap up. I really, really hope you enjoyed. Please comment your favourite book that you read this month. I would absolutely love to know, and I will hopefully see you in my next video.